"You need to leave. This lounge is for real clients." The words sliced through the polished stillness of the Summit Wealth Bank private lounge at exactly 10:17 a.m. The humidity from the Miami streets hadn't yet evaporated from Vanessa Clark's cashmere sweater when they hit her like a slap. But it wasn't just the words, it was who said them. Thomas Bradley, the branch manager, stood tall behind the mahogany desk. His tailored suit clung perfectly to his frame, his starched collar crisp. His hair was combed back meticulously, but nothing could polish the sneer curling at the corner of his mouth as he pointed directly at her, at Vanessa Clark, the woman who owned not just this lounge, but the entire institution. Thomas wasn't done. "Get out of my bank," he said again, louder, ensuring every client, every teller, every security guard heard him. His voice boomed with the entitlement of a man convinced that appearance alone dictated status. And in this moment, Vanessa's appearance, dark-washed jeans, pale blue cashmere sweater, simple black loafers, didn't fit the image of a multi-billionaire CEO in his eyes. Vanessa didn't blink. She had expected this. She had walked into this branch deliberately, alone, without appointment, without entourage, to test whether 2 years of ownership had changed anything. She came not as the CEO of Summit Enterprises, but as a woman, black, poised and unadorned by outward signs of wealth, to see if her institution had learned to treat people fairly. The answer arrived faster than she'd thought. Before she could utter a word, Thomas leaned toward the security guard standing nearby, Officer Tyler Moss, badge polished, posture rigid. "She doesn't belong here, Tyler. Escort her out now," Thomas ordered, his finger stabbing the air as though that gesture alone could erase her existence from this space. Vanessa sat perfectly still. In front of her sat a slim leather tablet case, closed but humming with silent authority. She placed her palm on it gently, grounding herself. Across the room, a murmur stirred. A silver-haired woman clutched her handbag tighter. A middle-aged man in a golf shirt glanced up from his phone. Even the espresso machine behind the glass counter seemed to hiss with discomfort as Thomas's voice echoed again. "Did you hear me? You're done here. This isn't a walk-in center. We have protocols," he barked. His words carried weight, but they also revealed cracks. His need to announce dominance, loudly and publicly, betrayed the fear that beneath Vanessa's quiet confidence lay a power he couldn't quite place. Vanessa's gaze didn't waver. The last time she heard this tone was at age 23, when a bank manager refused to cash her first real estate commission check. Then again at 26, when she sat across a loan officer who called her high risk despite her impeccable credentials. That same cold dismissiveness was back again, 20 years and $8 billion later. Thomas stepped forward, lowering his voice just enough so only she could hear. "You can't fake it here, not with me. I know exactly who's real," he whispered, his words dripping with presumption. A few feet away, Natalie Wells, the assistant manager, crossed her arms and added dryly, "That's a large withdrawal request for someone without verification." Without verification. The irony nearly made Vanessa smile, but she didn't. She sat, patient, letting the air thicken around her. Then, as if fate demanded a final insult before the storm broke, Edward Pierce, a senior client in a tailored gray suit, walked past her table. With a single, casual flick of his wrist, he knocked her leather tablet onto the marble floor. The thud was soft. The message was deafening. "Don't clog up the line, sweetheart," Edward sneered, not bothering to stop. Vanessa reached down slowly, retrieving her tablet, every motion deliberate, her calm a quiet defiance. She looked up, first at Edward's retreating back, then at Thomas Bradley, who now stood arms crossed, triumphant. This was exactly the moment she had come to witness. Vanessa tapped the corner of her tablet, the screen glowing softly beneath her hand. But before she could speak, Thomas jabbed his finger toward her again and snapped to Tyler Moss. Security now. His voice was rising, panicked beneath its arrogance. Vanessa finally spoke, her voice low but razor-sharp. Are you sure you want to do this? Thomas laughed, a hollow, brittle sound. I'm absolutely sure you don't belong here. Across the lounge, Keith Morris, a tech entrepreneur in his 30s, raised his phone, his finger hovering over the record button, hesitation written across his face. Vanessa met his eyes. Not yet, she said, almost gently. And in that moment, she straightened her posture and locked eyes with Thomas Bradley, her next words soft but carrying farther than his shouting could. Funny, she said, because I own it. Thomas Bradley froze, just for a second. His polished exterior faltered as Vanessa's words sank in. I own it. But arrogance is quick to recover. A bitter smirk curled across his lips. Oh, really? He sneered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Is that the story today? You just walk in here, dressed like that, and declare yourself owner? His gaze swept over her outfit again. Dark jeans, simple loafers, pale blue cashmere, and he let his disdain sharpen every syllable. Not a badge, not a briefcase, not even a proper suit. Just talk. Around them, a hush had fallen. Patrons shifted in their leather chairs, baristas froze mid-pour, and the marble floors gleamed with the cold reflection of disbelief. Then Natalie Wells stepped forward, her arms crossed, expression hard. Thomas is right, she said coolly. Her behavior is suspicious. That kind of withdrawal request, $5 million? Without an appointment, without verification, it doesn't add up. Thomas seized on Natalie's words like fuel. You hear that? He said, gesturing dramatically at the staff and clients watching from the sidelines. It doesn't add up. Vanessa remained seated, perfectly composed. She let them speak, because their words, dripping with assumption and bias, were building the case for her, not against her. But Thomas wasn't finished. He turned toward Edward Pierce, who had taken up a lazy lean against a marble pillar. Edward, Thomas called, his voice loaded with performative camaraderie. You see what's going on here? Someone playing dress-up thinking she can just waltz in and claim she owns the place. $500,000 today, $5 million tomorrow. Before you know it, we're the ones answering for this mess. Edward laughed, the sound sharp and ugly. Trust me, Tommy. She won't get a penny out of this bank, not today, not ever. His words emboldened Thomas further. He stepped closer to Vanessa's table, leaning down until his face hovered just above hers. Here's what's going to happen, he said, his voice low but venomous. You're going to stand up, you're going to apologize for wasting my time, and then you're going to walk out that door before security makes that decision for you. Vanessa didn't flinch. She tapped the tablet resting under her fingertips. The screen came alive with a soft glow. Her profile was queued up, credentials ready, corporate documentation at her fingertips. But Thomas didn't give her the chance. Before she could turn the screen toward him, he reached out suddenly and slapped the tablet out of her hand. It skidded across the polished marble, coming to rest near a leather chair at the far side of the lounge. A gasp rippled through the room. Even Natalie looked momentarily startled. That's enough, Vanessa said quietly, lifting her gaze directly into Thomas's eyes. But Natalie stepped in quickly to reassert control. Sir, I think we need to escalate this, she said, her voice sharp and authoritative. She's a con artist. She probably accessed someone's account details. Maybe hacked a login. There's no way this is legitimate. At the far corner, Calvin Holt, who had been watching silently, slowly rose to his feet. His presence alone was enough to shift the room's balance. Before he could speak, however, Thomas waved his hand dismissively at Calvin. Not your fight, sir, Thomas said. This is an internal matter. We're protecting the bank's integrity." Calvin's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing, yet. Meanwhile, Thomas doubled down. "You all think this woman has a legitimate claim?" he said, addressing the gathered onlookers as though rallying a jury. "Look at her. No ID shown. No appointment. No credentials." His voice rose with every accusation, his face flushed red with certainty. "This is a scam," Thomas declared. "She's a fraud, plain and simple." Then, without warning, Natalie picked up the phone on the counter and dialed quickly. Her voice rang out across the hushed lounge as she spoke to security dispatch. "This is Natalie Wells at Summit Wealth Bank Miami branch. We have a suspected fraud attempt. Client is requesting a high-value withdrawal under suspicious circumstances. Possible impersonation. Please send officers immediately." Her words felt rehearsed, practiced, weaponized. Vanessa exhaled slowly, her fingers steepled calmly as she watched Natalie finish the call. Thomas turned back toward her, triumphant again. "You thought you could bluff your way through this," he sneered. "Well, sweetheart, you picked the wrong day and the wrong bank." Vanessa locked eyes with him, her voice still quiet but firm. "Are you sure you want to keep digging this hole, Thomas?" But he didn't even hesitate. "Digging? No," he said smugly. "I'm burying you." Across the room, the air grew heavier. Clients whispered behind their cups. A young father clutched his child a little tighter. Zara Brooks, seated quietly near the frosted glass divider, lowered her gaze, but she heard every word. And somewhere near the espresso bar, Keith Morris's phone was once again hovering near the record button. Vanessa Clark didn't rise. Even as Thomas Bradley stood before her, eyes blazing with false authority, as Natalie Wells snapped her landline back into its cradle with a victorious click, as Edward Pierce chuckled darkly from his corner seat, she remained perfectly still. Her silence was not submission. It was precision. Across the lounge, Keith Morris hesitated, phone poised in his palm, thumb hovering uncertainly above the record button. His gaze met Vanessa's. For a fleeting second she considered nodding, allowing the documentation of this humiliation to begin. But she didn't. Instead, she raised one hand slightly, a small, almost imperceptible gesture, and whispered just loud enough for him to hear, "Macha, we don't need a camera. We need witnesses." Keith lowered his phone slowly, swallowing hard. This moment wasn't about a viral clip. It was about truth, spoken aloud, witnessed by every person present. Vanessa's stillness was unnerving. Even Thomas, so loud and brash only seconds earlier, faltered momentarily under the weight of her composure. And then came the voice that shifted the entire room. "Brother," said Calvin Holt, stepping forward. A tall man in a sharp gray suit, calm yet resolute, his voice carried not anger, but conviction. He gently placed a hand on Keith's shoulder. "Put it down. We change this not by filming their failure," he said, nodding toward Thomas and Natalie, "but by showing them that their power is already fading." "Right here. Right now. In this room." Keith hesitated, then let his phone slip back into his pocket. The silence that followed was deafening, but different. Not the oppressive silence that Thomas Bradley had created, but a charged stillness filled with awareness, with shared indignation. Natalie scoffed, arms still crossed, and muttered just loud enough for nearby patrons to hear. "Security's on their way. Let them handle this mess." Her words dripped with disdain, casual and cruel. Edward Pierce, still leaning against the marble pillar, added mockingly, "You really think this woman has $5 million sitting in an account here? She can't even afford a proper handbag." And as if to punctuate his insult, Edward flicked a crumpled receipt across the floor in Vanessa's direction. The paper fluttered, landing near the tip of her loafer. But Vanessa didn't move. Instead, it was Maya Reed, young, fierce, her fury barely contained, who spoke next. "Enough," she said, her voice shaking but clear. All eyes turned. "She's not the problem," Maya declared, pointing directly at Thomas and Natalie. "You are." Her words cracked the atmosphere wide open. Thomas sneered. "Miss Reed, watch yourself. You're still on my staff and this isn't your place to speak." Maya straightened her spine, lifting her chin slightly. "Not today," she said. "Today I speak, and I won't stand by while you humiliate her for existing." Thomas's face darkened. "You're out of line, Maya." But before he could say more, Calvin Holt stepped fully into the circle now forming around Vanessa. He addressed the room. "Not just Thomas and Natalie, but everyone. This isn't a protocol issue," he said evenly. "This is a character issue." A murmur of agreement stirred among a few clients seated near the espresso bar. A young Latino father, holding a toddler on his lap, nodded quietly. Even an elderly woman, who moments ago had clutched her purse protectively, now shifted uncomfortably in her seat as the weight of what was happening settled into the air around them. Natalie bristled. "You're all being manipulated," she snapped, frustration cracking her cool facade. But Vanessa finally spoke, her voice cutting cleanly through the tension like a blade of steel. "Manipulated? You called security on me for existing." The words hit harder than any accusation she could have made. They were undeniable. Simple, true. Robert Klain, the assistant manager, who had been standing awkwardly near the espresso machine, finally spoke, his voice low and heavy with conflicted shame. "Do you have any account verification?" he asked, not meeting Vanessa's gaze. His question was weak, empty, dragged out of him by habit rather than conviction. Vanessa didn't bother to answer him directly. Instead, she reached calmly for her tablet, where it still lay near the base of a leather chair, and tapped the screen once, her fingers steady. Then, lifting her phone to her ear, she made a quiet call that silenced the entire room. "Carla," she said smoothly. "They've escalated it. Proceed to Phase 2 of Protocol 6. On the other end, Carla Evans, her executive assistant, replied without hesitation, her voice as crisp and efficient as ever. "Already logged, ma'am. The language used has been noted. Internal audit is monitoring live." Vanessa closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them again, her gaze was sharp, her posture unwavering, to her presence undeniable. Thomas Bradley couldn't help himself. His face twisted with a sneer. "You're bluffing," he hissed. But even as he spoke, his confidence was beginning to crack. And in that crack, Vanessa sat. Calm, silent, deliberate, letting the storm they had summoned descend entirely on them. The silence in the lounge felt heavier than marble. Thomas Bradley's sneer was frozen halfway across his face, arrogance fraying at its edges. Natalie Wells tightened her arms across her chest, but a faint tremor betrayed her poise. Edward Fierce leaned forward in his leather chair, lips curled, eyes glinting. But even he sensed a shift. Vanessa Clark sat motionless, her phone still lifted to her ear. "Phase 2 is active," Carla's voice confirmed, calm and precise. "I've logged every word, every accusation. The compliance team is on standby and listening live. Shall I proceed with verification protocols?" Vanessa's reply was quiet but firm. "Yes, make it visible." Within seconds, the air in the lounge transformed. A notification tone pinged from the terminal at the teller desk. Natalie turned reflexively, her brow furrowing as she leaned over the screen. The glow from the monitor reflected across her pale face as she read the alert aloud, almost involuntarily. "Priority account flag. Owner level escalation. Credentials pending immediate confirmation. Corporate override engaged." Her voice trailed off. Thomas's face flushed deep red. "What the hell is this?" Vanessa didn't move, but her next words cut cleanly across the room. "This is the system you built, Thomas. One where your voice could override dignity, where appearances mattered more than truth. But the same system now recognizes a different authority. Mine. The lounge began to stir again. Maya Reed stepped closer, her voice rising with clarity. She's not bluffing. Calvin Holt nodded silently beside her, arms crossed, gaze unwavering. Clients who had sat in uneasy complicity now exchanged uncertain glances. A man near the espresso machine whispered to his wife, "She might actually own this place." Natalie swallowed hard and spun back toward Thomas. "Sir, this is showing a corporate override. It's pulling compliance logs in real time. I don't know how this is happening." Vanessa's eyes narrowed. "You buried complaints, didn't you, Natalie? How many women like me did you turn away? How many clients did you judge on sight alone?" Before Natalie could muster a defense, Carla's voice sounded crisply again, this time from the speaker on Vanessa's tablet, amplified for all to hear. "Summit Compliance confirms that this branch's service complaints have been reopened. Natalie Wells' employee record is under review. Incident language logged. Con artist, fraud, doesn't belong, dressed like that." Her words dropped like stones into the room. Thomas attempted a last grasp at control. "None of that matters," he barked, gesturing wildly toward Vanessa. "Where's the proof that she's who she says she is? This is just a script. I want a credential, an ID, something real." Vanessa lifted her tablet slowly and deliberately. With a gentle swipe, she opened a file, the Summit Enterprises Corporate Ownership Certificate, embossed and notarized, displaying her name. Vanessa Clark, founder and chief executive officer, 81% controlling owner, Summit Enterprises Holdings, parent company of Summit Wealth Bank. She didn't need to push it across the table. Carla spoke again. "Verification complete. Credentials authenticated in real time. All staff are advised that Ms. Vanessa Clark holds ultimate authority at this institution. Branch operations will now defer to her command." Thomas Bradley's mouth opened, then closed. His hands, once clenched in confident gestures, hung limp at his sides. For a moment the room felt utterly still. Even Edward Pierce, so eager to sneer moments ago, leaned back in his chair, pale and silent. Vanessa finally stood, not rushed, not aggressive, but with a grace that seemed to fill the entire lounge. She was no longer testing them. She was revealing them. "To those of you still questioning," she said, her voice calm but unmistakable, "this is your proof." She turned slowly, letting her gaze rest on each person in the room. "And Thomas," she added, her tone like cool steel, "you didn't just disrespect a client today. You disrespected the owner of this entire bank." A ripple of gasps spread through the lounge. Heath Morris, who had lowered his phone earlier, whispered under his breath, "She wasn't bluffing. She never was." At the teller counter, Natalie seemed to shrink, her arms falling to her sides as the enormity of what was unfolding washed over her. Maya stepped beside Vanessa now, her expression fierce but proud. "What happens next?" she asked quietly. Vanessa's reply was immediate and resolute. "We wait. Because the truth is coming, whether they want it or not." And at that very moment, as if summoned by her words, the double-glass doors to the lounge swung open. Two uniformed police officers stepped inside. Their boots echoed sharply on the marble floors. The test Vanessa had begun was nearly over. But the reckoning, it was only just beginning. The click of the police officer's boots on marble was unnervingly precise, as if punctuating every beat of Thomas Bradley's crumbling authority. Officer James Miller, a white man in his late 40s with a lined face and steady gaze, scanned the room calmly. Beside him, Officer Elena Diaz, younger, sharp-eyed, took in the scene with quiet skepticism. "We received a call reporting attempted financial fraud," Miller said, voice even but edged with curiosity. "Who made the report?" Before Natalie Wells could speak, Thomas Bradley stepped forward, lifting his chin. "I did," he said quickly, though the phone had been in Natalie's hand. "She's impersonating a high-net-worth client, requested an unauthorized withdrawal under suspicious circumstances. We followed internal protocol and escalated appropriately. He said it all in one breath, as if reciting a script. A script that was already unraveled. Vanessa Clark didn't flinch. Before the officers could respond, a voice rose from the side of the room. Soft but deliberate. "They're lying." It was Zara Brooks. The young black woman who had sat almost invisible behind a frosted glass divider now stood. Her denim jacket hung loosely on her small frame, but her voice was steady. "They did the same thing to me 2 weeks ago," Zara continued, lifting her phone, not to record but to reveal. "I came in to open a business account for my photography studio. Natalie refused to run my EIN, said freelancers with inconsistent histories weren't eligible. I recorded that conversation. I didn't post it, but maybe it's time." A ripple ran through the lounge. Clients leaned forward. Even Officer Miller paused, his gaze shifting to Natalie. "Ma'am," he asked carefully, "did you make that call knowing Ms. Clark's status?" Natalie blanched. "She didn't own it at the time," she blurted, panic creeping into her voice. But Vanessa's reply was cool, clear, and devastating. "I've owned this bank for nearly 2 years, which means what you just said is either a lie or a confession." Silence fell again, heavy with implication. Thomas Bradley's face reddened further, his confidence now visibly fraying. He glanced around, seeking support, but no one moved. Robert Klain, the assistant manager who had stood awkwardly in the background, finally spoke. His voice was quiet, laden with guilt. "I need to say something," he began. All eyes turned toward him. "Lisa." He caught himself. Thomas and Natalie instructed staff not to run verification if clients didn't look right. We were told to escalate quickly, call security first, questions later. His admission was soft, but the impact was thunderous. A murmur swept through the lounge, no longer whispers but sharp, audible indignation. Calvin Holt spoke up next, his voice measured. "This isn't about one withdrawal. This is about a culture, a policy disguised as procedure, weaponized against people who look like us." Vanessa nodded slightly, acknowledging his words. Officer Miller stepped forward, addressing Natalie directly. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "we will be filing a report, a full one. Whether or not any arrests occur today, there's now a documented pattern of discriminatory behavior." Natalie's composure cracked entirely. I didn't know it was her," she whispered, as if that somehow absolved her. But Vanessa's gaze was sharp and steady. "And if it had been someone else, would this process have been any different?" Natalie opened her mouth to speak, then closed it. Thomas Bradley tried one last time to seize the narrative. "She dressed like she didn't belong here," he barked. "We made a judgment call based on behavior. This isn't about race or appearance, it's about protocol." But Vanessa stepped forward now, standing between him and the officers. "That wasn't judgment," she said firmly. "That was bias, and today you weaponized it, loudly, publicly." Edward Pierce, still lingering by the marble pillar, muttered under his breath, "This is all getting dramatic." Maya Reed turned sharply toward him. "Dramatic?" she repeated, her voice trembling but strong. "You watched it happen and said nothing, just like them." Edward folded his arms, looking away, but the weight of the room had shifted beyond his dismissiveness. Officer Diaz finally spoke. "We're not making arrests today," she said carefully, "but what we've observed here, it's going in the report. Internal Affairs may request statements from all present." Vanessa met her gaze. "Good," she said simply. Then she turned to Zara Brooks, her tone softening. "You're brave," she told her. "You should never have needed to be." Zara nodded quietly, tears shining in her eyes. And as the officers prepared to leave, Calvin Holt stepped closer to Vanessa. "You didn't just reveal them today," he said. "You dismantled the shield they thought would protect them." Vanessa looked around the room once more. The truth had arrived. But her work, the reckoning, was only just beginning. The atmosphere inside the lounge had shifted from tense to charged, not with confrontation now, but revelation. The murmurs of disbelief had grown into quiet acknowledgement. Clients and staff alike seemed to shrink in their chairs, confronted not only by Vanessa's authority but by the uncomfortable truth emerging all around them. This was never about one woman, one withdrawal, or one day. It was about years of bias, routine dismissals, and prejudice hidden behind a polite veneer of protocol. Vanessa Clark stood centered in this transformation, her calm unbroken even as Thomas Bradley's bluster evaporated and Natalie Wells's cold professionalism dissolved into nervous silence. But then Robert Klein, the assistant manager who had until now kept his head bowed and words clipped, finally raised his voice. Low, heavy, but audible. "I need to say something," he repeated. His face was pale, his gaze fixed on the marble floor. His hands trembled, but he kept them at his sides. Vanessa turned her head slightly, granting him the smallest nod, permission, but not absolution. And Robert spoke. "Natalie and I, we buried complaints," he said, the admission sounding almost foreign in his own voice. "In the past year, 8 formal complaints, all from women of color. Clients who came here asked for service, asked for fairness." He paused, swallowing hard. "We flagged their files as unverifiable," he continued, "marked them as duplicates or filed them under not actionable. And when anyone asked, we blamed the system, said it was a corporate policy, but it wasn't." Natalie gasped quietly but said nothing. Her eyes glistened now, hands no longer crossed defensively but wrapped around herself, as though she could somehow hold her guilt in place. A hush rippled through the lounge. The elderly man near the espresso bar put down his cup with a quiet clink. Zara Brooks lowered her phone, shaking her head slowly, recognition and heartbreak etched on her face. Maya Reed spoke next, her voice cracked but resolute. "You erased them," she said, addressing Robert and Natalie directly. "With policies, with paperwork, you made them invisible." Vanessa remained silent. She didn't need to add anything, their own words were doing the work now. And then Natalie herself broke. Her voice came out rough, small, but clear enough to reach everyone present. "I did it," she whispered, tears finally spilling over. "I flagged those complaints, all of them. I thought I was protecting the branch." Her confession was raw. "I thought if I kept our record clean, corporate wouldn't look too closely," she continued. "Lisa, Thomas told me to watch for certain kinds of clients, said it was about risk management. He said, we can't afford high-maintenance clients who draw attention." She shook her head, face crumpling. "I buried them," she repeated. "All of them. I told myself it was policy. But it wasn't policy. It was bias. It was me." Thomas Bradley didn't defend her. His face had drained of color, but his pride held him silent, unwilling to share in the confession that might have spread some blame. Vanessa finally spoke, and when she did, her voice was gentle, but unwavering. "You weren't protecting the branch, Natalie," she said. "You were protecting a system that should never have existed, and you helped maintain it, knowing it harmed people who walked through these doors with hope and dignity." Natalie nodded slowly, her composure completely gone. "I know," she whispered. "I know." In the corner, Keith Morris's voice broke the silence next. "This isn't just misconduct," he said, turning toward Calvin Holt. "It's a culture." Calvin nodded. And at that moment, as if summoned by the clarity in Keith's words, Carla Evans's voice returned over Vanessa's tablet speaker. "Vanessa, corporate compliance confirms we've pulled the complaint records. 8 separate incidents, all flagged by Natalie, 4 approved by Robert's signature. A pattern of willful suppression." Her voice paused briefly, then added, "This branch is now formally under internal audit review, effective immediately." The weight of those words settled over the room. Vanessa stepped forward, not to gloat, not to punish, but simply to reclaim the dignity that had been stolen from so many before her. She addressed Natalie directly. "You weren't a bystander," she said, her voice soft but edged with steel. "You weren't following orders, you were holding the pen while others were being erased." Natalie sank into a chair, burying her face in her hands. "And Thomas Bradley said nothing at all." Vanessa turned slowly to the room. "This isn't over," she said quietly. "But today this stops." The reckoning had fully begun, not with shouting, not with violence, but with truth spoken aloud, witnessed by all. Impossible to ignore any longer. Vanessa Clark stood at the very center of the marble-floored lounge. Once designed to convey exclusivity, now transformed into a tribunal. Every eye was on her, some filled with shame, others with awe, but all watching. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her very presence now commanded the air. Her tablet glowed softly in her hand as Carla Evans' calm voice echoed again through its speaker, crisp and undeniable. "Vanessa has full termination authority under Summit Compliance Directive 4B. This conversation is being logged and will serve as formal notice for HR purposes. You may proceed, ma'am." Vanessa drew a quiet breath. The moment she had orchestrated had arrived. She stepped forward, her eyes locking first on Thomas Bradley. "Thomas Bradley," she said clearly, "you are terminated effective immediately for racial bias, abuse of authority, obstruction of client services, and harassment." His face flushed deep crimson. For a moment it seemed like he might speak, one last desperate plea, one final grasp at justification, but the words never came. His mouth opened, then shut. His shoulders slumped, and in that instant, the authority he had wielded so carelessly evaporated completely. Before he could step back, Vanessa turned to Natalie Wells. "Natalie," she said evenly, "you are terminated for knowingly fabricating client risk reports, suppressing legitimate complaints, and making a false report to law enforcement. Your pattern of discriminatory practices has been formally logged." Natalie let out a shuddering breath, her composure shattered long ago. Tears streaked down her face. She made no protest. She simply nodded once, a small broken motion, and lowered her gaze. Vanessa turned next to Robert Clean. "Robert," she said, her tone unwavering, "you are terminated for complicity. You signed off on 4 complaint rejections without review, and stood silent while discrimination unfolded around you." Robert closed his eyes as if bracing for impact. He didn't speak. He simply lowered his head, shoulders sagging in resignation. And then Vanessa's gaze fell on Tyler Moss, the security lead. "You, Mr. Moss, are dismissed for aggression, attempted unlawful detainment, and failure to de-escalate a situation you were entrusted to manage fairly." Tyler's jaw tensed. But he didn't argue. He stepped back slowly, hands loose at his sides, accepting his dismissal with grim understanding. Finally, Vanessa's eyes turned toward Edward Pierce. Though not an employee, he had played a starring role in this shameful theater. "Edward Pierce," she said, her voice cold as glass, "you are hereby banned from all Summit-affiliated institutions, effective immediately, for harassment, documented misconduct, and contributing to a hostile environment." Edward's smug confidence cracked. He shot upright, waving his platinum business card in the air like a badge of entitlement. "You can't ban me," he barked. "I'm worth more to this bank than half these clients combined." But before Vanessa could even answer, Maya Reed spoke sharply from her side. "Not today, you're not." The room rippled with quiet agreement. Vanessa simply raised a hand, silencing the space again. "We don't build institutions to serve the loudest ego," she said, her voice steady and resonant. "We build them to protect the quiet dignity of anyone who walks through our doors expecting fairness." Her words carried more weight than any policy ever had. A round of applause broke out, not polite or performative, but raw and cathartic. It was applause filled with the exhaustion of years of injustice and the relief that someone had finally drawn a line. Vanessa let it rise and fall naturally before she spoke again, her tone softer but still resolute. "To every staff member and client in this room," she said, turning slowly so that no one could escape her gaze, "this was not an accident. This was culture. A culture cultivated and protected by people who believed their authority made them untouchable." She paused briefly. "But today that illusion is over." Carla's voice returned over the speaker. "Corporate compliance officers are en route. Estimated arrival 15 minutes. They are prepared to initiate a full branch audit under your leadership." Vanessa nodded once. "Good," she replied. "We begin today." Her gaze shifted again, softer now, toward Zara Brooks, who still stood quietly near the divider, tears in her eyes, but standing tall nonetheless. "And you, Zara," Vanessa said gently, "you were erased once by this branch. That will never happen again. Your business account will be opened personally by the Summit Executive Board. No fees, no delay." Zara pressed her lips together, overwhelmed. But Vanessa wasn't finished. She turned once more to the stunned room. Staff, clients, security, police officers all witnessing this reckoning in real time. "Effective immediately," she announced. "This branch will suspend all normal operations until a full culture reset has been completed. No transactions, no account actions, no client meetings until we redefine what this institution stands for." There was no protest from the clients. Many nodded silently. Some even clapped again. Maya Reed stepped closer, her voice tinged with awe. "You didn't just fire a team today," she said softly. "You fired a mindset." Vanessa's faint, tired smile said everything. "Yes," she replied, "and we're just getting started." Behind her, the glass doors to the lounge remained open, wide enough now for a different kind of future to step through. For the first time that morning, the private client lounge felt quiet. But it was no longer the cold, brittle quiet that had greeted Vanessa Clark when she first walked in. It was a thoughtful quiet, a space finally cracked open for something honest to take root. Vanessa let the silence linger, absorbing it. The staff members she had just dismissed were gone now, escorted to a separate holding room where corporate compliance officers would soon begin their formal debrief. The clients who remained sat straighter, leaning forward not to gossip, but to listen. This moment was no longer about scandal or spectacle. It was about what would come next. Vanessa walked slowly to the center of the room. The cream-colored leather chair she had occupied earlier, once a symbol of exclusion, stood empty behind her. She didn't sit. She didn't need to anymore. "I want you all to understand something," she began, her voice steady but warm, filling every corner of the lounge. "Ownership isn't just about who signs the checks or whose name is on a certificate. Ownership is about responsibility." Her gaze swept over the room, Zara Brooks standing quietly near the divider, Calvin Holt watching with quiet pride, Maya Reed clutching a notepad, Keith Morris leaning forward in his chair, still stunned by the depth of what he'd witnessed. "It's about the obligation we all carry to make sure places like this," she continued, gesturing to the polished marble, "serve not only the privileged few who walk in wearing a tailored suit, but everyone who dares walk in with dignity." Carla Evans's voice chimed in gently from the speaker of Vanessa's tablet. "Vanessa, the full audit framework for this branch is approved and live in the system. Your leadership will guide implementation." Vanessa nodded once, then turned back to the room. "This branch is no longer just a building," she said. "It will be the first test site for a new way of doing business. Starting today, We will launch the Summit Equity Program right here, not next quarter, not after a committee meeting, but today." Her words resonated deeply. "We will track not only numbers but language," she declared. "Every conversation with every client will be part of a new process, verbal audits, because how we speak to people matters just as much as what we offer them." Clients exchanged glances, some tentative, some smiling. For many, this was the first time a financial institution had ever spoken about dignity as policy. Vanessa let her next words soften, almost inviting. "This means this branch, and every branch that follows, will no longer tolerate silence as an excuse. If a client is dismissed unfairly, if bias shows up in words, tone, or behavior, it will be logged, audited, and acted on." Maya Reed raised a tentative hand, her voice trembling with hope. "What about us?" she asked quietly. "The staff who stayed silent but want to help fix this?" Vanessa smiled gently, truly smiling for the first time that day. "We'll rebuild together," she said. "Every employee who chooses to stay will be required to take part in a new face-to-face values pledge, not just a signature on paper, but a conversation, a commitment, a culture reset." Her eyes softened as they fell again on Zara. "And you, Zara, you represent the clients we failed before today, the clients we will never fail again. You deserve not just an apology, but a future built on fairness." Zara wiped a tear and nodded quietly. Keith Morris leaned forward, his voice a whisper but urgent. "This changes everything." Vanessa met his gaze and nodded. "That's the point." Then she spoke not just to the room, but to the world beyond it. Her next words were no longer for the people seated before her. They were for every person watching from afar who had ever been dismissed, doubted, or denied. For anyone listening, anyone who's been told they don't belong, anyone who's walked into a place and felt invisible, this story is for you. Her voice carried more than resolve. It carried invitation. "We didn't fix everything today," she admitted honestly. "But we started. And that's how real change begins, not with slogans, not with hashtags, but with what we do right here in moments when no one expects us to act." She let the pause hang gently. "And that's what I'm asking of you," she added, her voice warming further, her gaze as steady as ever. "If this story has moved you, if you've ever felt unseen, if you believe we can build something better together, then don't just sit with this moment. Like this story, share it, comment on it, subscribe to this channel, join this conversation, not tomorrow, not later, now." Her words were quiet but electric. Because justice doesn't just happen in boardrooms. It happens when people speak up, when they refuse to stay silent, when they hold institutions accountable, and when they hold themselves accountable too. She stepped forward once more, standing where Thomas Bradley had once pointed and shouted, now reclaiming that very space as her own. "I didn't raise my voice today," she said, her final words smooth and strong. "I didn't threaten, and I didn't rage. I stood still, I spoke clearly, I owned my dignity, and I demanded this place live up to it." Her gaze swept once more across the lounge, now quiet, attentive, transformed. "If I can do that here," she concluded, "then so can you, wherever you are." She offered a small, genuine smile, one part closure, one part invitation. Then, without waiting for applause, she turned toward the compliance team gathered by the entrance. "Let's begin," she said simply. As she walked through the doors, leaving the stunned crowd in her wake, Carla's voice echoed gently through the speaker one final time. "Summit Wealth will never be the same, and that's exactly the point.